Welcome to the first episode of Examining Life. I'm talking with Josh today. He's an undergraduate student at Southern Connecticut State University. And what's your major?
Philosophy and a minor in political science.
Okay, wonderful. So our next question is, what ethical criteria do you live by?
I hold to a view that's typically known as a divine command theory of morality. It's characterized by one of my philosophy professors as kind of like a god of the philosophers kind of way of viewing morality, not so much divine command theory, but I see it as a version of that. The ethical criteria I live by is directly linked to my ethical theory. I'm a moral realist, so that means that I do believe that there are such things as objective moral values. When I say objective, maybe transcendent, that means that there are morals that go beyond human opinion. So this is to say that the Holocaust was evil. It doesn't matter if the entire world was brainwashed to thinking that it was okay, it would still be evil. So I differentiate between moral values and moral duties.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there's objective moral values and objective moral duties. Well, objective moral duty is something that you're obliged to do, that you're obligated to do morally. For example, you're obligated to take care of your kids. You're obligated to, not stab someone. You're obligated to contribute. And moral value would be something that is there's many moral values in life. It's morally valuable to be a doctor. It's morally valuable to be a lawyer. It's morally valuable to be a firefighter. However, you're not obligated to do all of those. They all have value to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think moral values is like what's good and bad. More objective morals is what's right and wrong. So I get this. I go from there and I kind of distinguish those two things, and I think that my ethical criteria is that there are objective moral duties, but the objective moral values are things that are optional in life. I don't think that any ethical theory necessarily competes with moral divine command theory. I think that they are. I guess the way I answer this is like divine command theory is a ontology of morals. While I think that a lot of and maybe a lot of ethical philosophers may disagree with me on this, but I see like the Kantian view, the Aristotelian view. I see those as how to do morality, ways to find out like what are the right paths. I can't really dissolve morals into completely just reason.
Mm-hmm.
My criteria in my ethical theory is that most of morals are about common sense. Most of them are about reason, of course. But then when you get down to it and you really kind of dig, you find that there are morals that don't really make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you see morality as a thing in and of itself. So
yeah, like what is a moral that doesn't make sense other than if you see it as a thing in itself? I
would say altruism. That's the first one that comes to mind, like a knee-jerk kind of idea is altruism. It wouldn't have real survival value for the individual, of course, but there are just things that seem to be right regardless of their value to you as a person, like in the immediate space.
Right.
So I think that virtue ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, I think that they're all valuable in some way. I don't disregard them, but I think that once you use it as a means to count for the ontology of morals, then I think it becomes problematic. As what I've studied of these three main theories is that I see that it's unavoidable, like the assumption of human value and human worth is unavoidable in these theories.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem is that you need that theory to make them all work as not as ways to know how to do things in the world and how to be a good person, but as ways to explain what morality is, like the ontology of it, then you run into problems because there's an assumption that I don't have to take. You know, if I am a bad person, I don't have to assume. Let's say, for example, deontology, or like the idea that one of the things about Kant's theory is he says it's almost like a golden rule. You know, don't do something that you wouldn't want everyone else to do. You know, a maxim that you wouldn't want universalized. But then the question comes in, which is that why should I care about what the other person, what happens to the other person, even if I wouldn't want that done to me? Why is that? I don't see the logical connection there between those two things of why I wouldn't want to do that just because I wouldn't want you to do it to me. Unless I thought there was something that you had a value to you as a human being that's equal to mine, then it would not make sense to. But the human value portion of it is essential to that theory. Now, I think that's why I think divine command theory puts that together. It actually gives a grounding for human value. I like to say objective moral values, like God makes things objective, morals objective, not absolute.
Okay.
Now there's a difference because that means that it doesn't mean that killing, for example, is always wrong.
Okay.
It means that there's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do in every circumstance.
Right.
Objectively. Yeah. Based on the values, based on certain objective moral values and virtues, things like that. But notice it's not saying there's absolute moral values. Like this is always wrong to lie, you know.
Right, or always wrong to kill.
Exactly. Right. So it kind of, I think maybe some people might think of it that way when they think of the divine command theory. They think about that problem, but that's not really. It kind of escapes that problem, you know.
So the next question that Josh is going to answer consists of, what is knowledge? Do you know anything? And if so, what do you know?
Well, obviously, yeah. Like I know that I'm thinking. We could start there, and that's where I start with my ideas. I have to tie this a little bit back to my theistic belief. There's two kind of ways of approaching knowledge about God. So my knowledge, for example, of God's existence is a properly basic belief. My capital K knowing that God exists is a properly basic belief that is foundational in that it is I don't want to say experiential, like I'm not saying a religious experience or a psychedelic experience. What I'm saying that it seems to be a belief that interacts with me as well as the real world. It's a lens through which I see things, and there to me doesn't seem to be any defeaters of that belief, because I'm not convinced by the arguments from evil, for example. But then, you know, lowercase k, for example, knowing, like, I'm not sure, you know, about God's existence in the way that I'm sure as God is a properly basic belief. So let's talk about the arguments for God's existence. Those are exterior arguments. Those are arguments that are this natural theology. It's man-made attempts to know about God's existence. So they can be fallible. So I understand they're work in progress. They're not always perfect. They've been developed through years and years and years. And so if you were to ask me, do I know, for example, do I know God exists? I would say yes, but not for rational reasons. I believe God exists. I think that those, because of abductive reasoning and because of evidence, you know. So that kind of ties into that. That's ways that I know.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Those are foundational. So what I meant to start out was to say, like, I know that I exist. I start from there, and that's where my experience comes in, and that's where my knowledge of God comes in. And I think that if that's true, then it gives a foundation to the rest of my truth.
How do you define knowledge?
I define knowledge as what is true about your experience. So, I'm not really much of a relativist when it comes to knowledge. I think that you need objective truth that's a big thing right now. You know, the relative truth, your truth. This kind of talk, like there's perspective. I don't want to completely denounce perspective, but that's completely different from certain things in reality that are true. So I think the way I define knowledge is just what is true about the world you inhabit. You know, and that's why I go back to the Descartes. My way of, someone will say, well, you don't know if you're inhabiting this room right now, for example, and I would say, well, all that matters is I know what's true about the Matrix. You might say it's not authentic, but the only worst possible issue is that we're being deceived into a world that is exactly like the one outside this one, so therefore it's just another world. I guess that sounds kind of like compromising, but
yeah,
that's just my way of escaping it, because I think that the question of the Matrix kind of doesn't matter. I think that's kind of my way of putting it, and I have reasons why I don't think it matters.
Okay.
You know, and those reasons are that it would be just the same thing if what the deception is another world that emulates this one exactly. What is really the difference is that your consciousness is in another body, or, you know, that one's made out of flesh, or this one's made out of whatever, you know. But the thing is, it's virtually the same. This is something that actually ties into my ethical theory. My ethical theory relies on the premise that objective moral values exist. Now, how would you really prove that? That's a knowledge claim, and it's a metaphysical knowledge claim at that. One of the ways that I go about proving this is what's called justified true belief theory, which is the idea that you're justified to believe something unless there are defeaters for that belief. So this kind of goes into Descartes' ideas and meditations about the evil demon, and I think the way that I escape that problem is I hold to the idea that whatever, exactly what I mentioned, without, in absence of a defeater, for example, of whether there's an evil demon, I'm justified in not believing in the evil demon, because that the real world is more obvious to me. And the reason why it's more obvious to me is because I constantly experience it. It's a properly basic belief. It's a belief that you hold to, although it's not able to be proved without circularity. People usually pose a dilemma when it comes to knowledge about like authenticity, or like what's kind of called capital K knowledge. Like, let's say if we are being tricked and we're in the Matrix, I guess people want to know that.
Whether or not we're being tricked?
Yes, they want to know whether we're really here. The thing is, I just think that it's pretty clear that we need to change our criteria of satisfaction for knowledge, which is something to what we usually do. There's the abductive reasoning, you have deductive reasoning, and everyone wants that question is about the deductive. People want to know they want to know deductively, but there's hardly anything in reality that we know deductively. I think 98% of things that we accept as beliefs or ideas or knowledge on the average is through abductive reasoning. And inductive, depending on how you categorize it. So I think that when it comes to knowing something or knowing we're really here, I think abductive reasoning is fine, and I think that my way of getting out of the whole evil demon dilemma is just to say, well, whatever I'm looking at now, whatever I know about, let's say if we are in the Matrix, I know that about the Matrix. If you're claiming that there's something more that's more real, if the evil demon, there's either two possibilities. The evil demon is able to completely replicate the world outside in all dimensions, in all ways, or there is something better, I guess.
My follow-up question for you is, can't God be a sort of evil demon, even if it's not evil, but in the sense that it's all controlling or all knowing. Like,
I think that there's two ways to escape. Like, there's the first kind of knee-jerk way to kind of escape that dilemma would be to point to the essential properties of God. So this comes from kind of the ontological arguments, studying like what if there is a maximally great being, these are the qualities that he must have. So I don't want to just like throw out there, you know, like, oh, this is what God has to be, but there's
Right.
actual philosophical reasons why if God were to exist, this would be the quality he must have.
yeah.
One of those qualities would be being all good. So whatever we are being deceived of by God would not necessarily be bad. So you mentioned God as a deceiver.
Yeah, or an equivalent of that sort of character of like an all-controlling being.
It depends on what kind of control we're talking about. Like control of our knowledge, control of our being, control of our movements, our actions, you know.
Well, the evil demon is supposed to control everything in Descartes' theory, so I would say like God controlling everything about anyone or everyone or anyone's actions.
No, I think, well, my belief is that God gives us free will. I believe in free will. So
Okay. Thank you so much.